So the anime special for Fate Strange Fake, Whispers of Dawn, just came out globally. It's really exciting, especially for how obscure and inaccessible its light novel and manga adaptations are to English speakers. While I loved the special, I suspect it might be confusing for Fate fans who haven't had the chance to really experience the full breadth of Type Moon works that it references. Let's fix that. Welcome back to Otaku Daikun, Dai-chan here. I want to start this video off by declaring that finally, the Tsukihime remake has been announced for an official localization in early 2024. As far as I'm concerned, this is a monumental achievement. Of course, this reveal was made shortly after Tsukihimates completed their own fan translation, and I can only imagine how frustrating that must be. I too made a whole series of videos summarizing the remake for you guys. None of that would have been necessary if Type Moon and Aniplex had acknowledged the fandom sooner. That, and some people are going to prefer the fan translation anyway, which is perfectly reasonable. Still, I think it's because of all of our efforts that we're finally getting the acknowledgement we deserve. I'd like to think that my videos helped spread interest in Tsukihime, contributing to our current situation. Let's pay it forward by supporting the official release, hammering home the fact that we really do want this stuff. Even if it's not the best localization out there, based on the quality of Witch on the Holy Night, I can safely say it's not being censored or injected with unnecessary memes. Also, if you enjoy this content, be sure to like, comment, share, and smash that subscription bell as if it were your waifu. Consider supporting us directly by becoming a paid channel member or joining our Subscribestar or Patreon. All three platforms offer the same perks, such as early access and exclusive videos. The most important thing about your help is that it allows us to make whatever videos we want without needing to rely on YouTube's policies or algorithm. Without further ado, let's tackle the main topic. Some of you might already be in the comments typing, "But Dai, Saya already made a video just like this." I'm fully aware, but hopefully you guys are watching because you want my take and enjoy my style of presentation. At the end of the day, these are my thoughts, even if there's overlap on what we're covering. Hell, you might consider this my pre-lore to Strange Fake, with the main lore video referencing back to this one. So, Fate Strange Fake is a really cool spin-off of the Holy Grail Wars we were exposed to in Fate Stay Night and Fate Zero. To an extent, it's safe to consider Strange Fake a sequel to Stay Night, even though technically it's an alternate timeline just like Fate Apocrypha. Unlike Apocrypha, however, this story draws upon more of what came before it. It references plot points from Zero, Stay Night, and el-melloi case files. It's honestly in your best interest to become familiar with all three works, and my channel has an entire Type Moon lore playlist that has you covered. Even then, however, it's a bit confusing. It's going to be a while before the full Strange Fake anime releases, so for now, let's take this opportunity to analyze and flesh out what's been shown to us in this anime special. I'll try to be light on the spoilers, only covering them if they help build the groundwork for anything shown in the pilot. The goal here is to prep you so that when the series does come out, you'll be fully equipped for whatever gets thrown your way. The first thing to note comes from the title, Strange Fake. This story covers two wars that occur simultaneously in the United States of America in 2009. That means it occurs after the 4th and 5th Grail Wars in Fuyuki. These new wars are referred to as the True and False Holy Grail Wars, though you'll see the terms false and fake used interchangeably. For the Mages Association, these wars seem to come out of nowhere, but in truth, they've been in the works ever since the Third War 70 years prior. The American government caught wind of the wars occurring in Fuyuki and set out to make a replica of them. To do so, they hired an exceptionally devious figure, the twisted young girl we see in this anime. She's Francesca Prelati, though not even that name does her justice. In truth, she is a reincarnation of Francois Prelati, an Italian cleric who lived in France during the time of Joan of Arc's execution. Surely you remember Bluebeard, or Gilles de Rais from Fate Zero? That sicko was one of Jeanne d'Arc's most loyal soldiers, to the point where her death drove him to madness. In a desperate attempt to invoke God's wrath, he performed all manner of atrocities, mostly on innocent children. Well, it turns out Gilles learned all of his black magic from his good old pal Francois. In fact, it's Prelati's spellbook that Gilles uses to summon his Lovecraftian horrors. Similar to folks like Zokin and dead apostles like Michael Rowe of Aldemyong, Francois endured over the years by taking on new bodies upon dying. Francesca just so happens to be his latest form, though I've got to admit, he's got the creepy girl act down to an art. Decades prior, the American government hired Francois to observe and replicate the Grail Wars in Fuyuki. He even tried to reunite with Gilles during the Fourth War, but was deterred by Zokin of all people. Glad to know those worms were good for something, I suppose. Either way, attempts to keep Francois away didn't stop him from obtaining fragments of the Greater Grail, nor the mud that poured out from the Lesser Grail at the end of Fate Zero. Now in a female form, Francesca has delivered these assets to America and is excited to obtain the Grail for her own means, which I'll leave as a secret for now. In the meantime, she plans to relish in the carnage, looking forward to slaying Ruler should one be summoned. In general, the False Grail War is meant to be a precursor to the true one. Unlike a proper Grail War, the false one only features 6 masters and servants, sabers not included among the ranks. The true war, however, features all 7, with the chance of an additional ruler. Exactly why the wars were set up like this is a mystery for now, but part of the reason seems to be America's relatively scarce history. Despite there being entire classes in school dedicated to American history, the United States is a very young country compared to places like China or Japan. Magecraft is based off the concept of mystery, deriving power from superstitions and religious beliefs. That speculation gave mages in the Age of Gods plenty of fuel to work with, but due to scientific discoveries, most humans are now less pious of the supernatural than in centuries prior. To that extent, the United States doesn't have as many long-running myths or legends, making it unsuitable for a Grail War. Well, even the government knew this, and so instead of using a prominent US city as their battleground, they targeted Snowfield, Nevada, a fictional region north of Vegas. For over 1,000 years, the region's indigenous people had been resisting foreign settlers. Only recently have the government and participating mages taken over, developing Snowfield into a metropolis. It's because of this that Teenage Elk, a young girl from the indigenous protectors of the land, stepped up and essentially stole Gilgamesh from the unnamed mage who summoned him. Tine was originally going to be a sacrifice for her people, but was chosen to represent them as a master instead. This is a good call, because she's a talented mage, deriving considerable power from Snowfield's mana ley lines. In fact, she's so connected to the land that she'll die if she ever leaves. So yeah, an arrogant mage successfully summoned Gilgamesh as the false archer, and Tine promptly stepped in to intercept. Luckily, Gilgamesh takes a liking to Tine's humility. Given how Gilgamesh claims ownership over the entire planet and its treasures, he appreciates how Tine and her people live alongside the land of Snowfield rather than asserting dominance over it. Ultimately, she and her people simply wish to free the land of government interference. Gilgamesh likes this much more than Tokiomi's wish for the root, and so he bestows Tine with 2 of his treasures. One is the Potion of Youth from his own legend, and the other is a Sumerian ring that renders her invisible to anyone without significant power. Hopefully, she won't need to throw this ring into Mount Doom. As an aside, I'd like to note that this version of Gilgamesh only has a vague recollection of his experiences in Zero and Stay Night. Normally, servants can't remember their past incarnations, but Gil has clairvoyance, allowing him to recall being drenched in the Grail's mud. He blames this mud for him not remembering more about his time in Fuyuki, and believes that if this war's Grail is genuine, he can purify himself with it. Now, I mentioned before that the American government is affiliated with mages. Specifically, it's a partnership with the Fallius Organization, a group of mages who, alongside Francesca, are responsible for starting and maintaining these true and false Grail Wars. We see its representative, Fallius Diolan, announce these wars to the Mages Association by killing his mentor Langdal. He knew Langdal was using a puppet body and assassinated it so that the real Langdal would alert the clock tower. Though I suppose it's more accurate to say that Fallius' soldiers killed Langdal's puppet. You see, unlike the clock tower, the Fallius Organization is made up of both mages and non-mages. Just like Kiritsugu, they don't hesitate to use modern weaponry to combat magecraft. Seems fitting for an American organization to rely on guns, but given what I said about the US being a relatively young country, it does make sense that they'd need more than just mystery on their side. For the most part, it appears that Fallius is less interested in who joins the False Grail War, allowing outside mages to join as they please. For the true war, however, it seems the organization aims to curate the roster more carefully. Fallius Dioland, for instance, happens to be the master of true assassin, which begs us to ask, who is the false assassin? If you're a Fate purist, this part might be a bit confusing. The closest thing you get to Dead Apostles and Fate exclusively is when Kiritsugu's dad turned his village into bloodthirsty monsters as part of a failed experiment on immortality. Well, that's basically what Dead Apostles are, a defective form of vampire that can stay immortal so long as it continues to drink blood. Dead Apostles originally came about when true ancestors, a pure vampiric race, succumbed to their bloodlust and started feeding on ordinary humans. But there are a handful of mages who intentionally become them as a means of extending their lives. At the top of the food chain are the 27 Dead Apostle Ancestors, a loose organization of the absolute strongest. One of these Dead Apostle ancestors is known as Von Femme, and like most top-level vampires, he has a lineage of followers and subordinates. The Master of False Assassin is Jester Carteret, a descendant of Von Femme who covets the Grail to combat his boredom of the world. He's got a more specific goal in mind, but we'll save that for later. The Assassin class was originally reserved for the various Hassani Saba, leaders of the Hashashin cult. These 19 leaders took on the name Hassan after mastering a miracle or special ability called a Zabaniya. What Jester summons isn't one of the official 19 Hassans, but rather an unnamed woman who was once a candidate to become the 19th Hassan. Basically, she was an overachiever. In her attempt to be chosen as the next leader, she mastered all 18 Zabaniya from previous generations. Sadly, rather than praising her, the cult feared her, denying her the position with the excuse that she had yet to master a miracle of her own. Thus, the 19th Hassan became Hassan of 100 Faces, the assassin we met in Fate Zero. As such, his Zabaniya, Delusional Illusion, is the only one that False Assassin can't use. That's still 18 different noble phantasms as a servant, which is really impressive. Right out of the gate, she goes on a killing spree, murdering Jester and his henchmen. Perhaps she's more orthodox than her peers, but her goal seems to be destroying the Holy Grail and ending the ritual, seeing it as heresy. After killing her own master, she plans to use what little time she has to disrupt the war. Of course, Jester is a Dead Apostle, so having his heart crushed by the cursed arm only sets him back a bit. Despite her temperament, Jester seems pleased by what this beautiful assassin is capable of. Needless to say, the servants that get summoned for the False War tend to be unconventional. This also includes the means by which servants get summoned. Enter Flat Escardos, one of Waver Velvet's most talented students. You should know him pretty well if you've been keeping up with el-melloi case files, but I'll give you a quick rundown right here. Basically, during the Fourth Grail War, Waver summoned Iskandar, or Alexander the Great, using a relic he stole from his teacher, Kenneth el-melloi Archibald. Kenneth still found a way to participate, but ultimately died during the war. This put the el-melloi faction in danger, with other mage families swarming in to steal its wealth and prestige. To stop this, Rhinus el-melloi Archisort reached out to Waver and appointed him the temporary Lord el-melloi II. He would hold down the position politically until she came of age to take up the mantle herself. Waver isn't a very talented mage, certainly not appropriate for a lord, but he compensates with his insane amount of knowledge, which he imparts to his students. His greatest wish was to join the Fifth Grail War and re-summon Iskandar, but that didn't go quite as planned. With the news of a new Grail War in Snowfield, his student Flat wants to get in on the action. Flat is the ultimate mage prodigy, a boy born with insane talent despite his cheerful, carefree nature. He has bountiful magic circuits, as well as an intuitive, instinctive understanding of the craft, allowing him to pull off amazing things without a formal education. Rather than learning the fundamental principles behind his spells, he performs them second nature. If not for his poor grades, the Clock Tower would have little to offer him, to the point where only a genius teacher like Waver can really guide his education. When Longal came to tell the Clock Tower about the war unfolding in Nevada, Flat nonchalantly bypassed several layers of bounded fields to eavesdrop on Longal's confidential meeting with Waver. He wants to enter the war, not out of some desperate need for the Grail's wish-granting properties, nor the root. Instead, he wants to join so that he can experience and meet with great heroes from the past. Optimistically, he'd rather make friends with all the servants than fight against them. Waver actually understands this sentiment, but nevertheless denies him like a hypocrite. In a scene paralleling Fate Zero, Flat winds up intercepting a package sent to Waver, which he mistakenly believes is a catalyst meant for the war. He begs to keep it, and Waver gives the box to him, knowing that what's inside is just a prop dagger from a video game. Waver thinks he's just giving his student a toy, unaware that Flat misinterprets this as getting his blessing to fly to America. After arriving in Snowfield, Flat begins playing around with the dagger, as well as the monolay lines at its park, which accidentally summons his own servant without a proper summoning ritual. His servant winds up being the false berserker, Jack the Ripper. That might seem strange, since Fate Apocrypha already gave us a version of Jack the Ripper as a cute little murder loli. Plus, she was an assassin, not a berserker. Now, if there were such a thing as the true Jack the Ripper in Fate, it would be the little girl version, who was an amalgamation of all the aborted children at London's Whitechapel district. Her master summoned her, using the actual knives she wielded when slaying women in an attempt to return to the womb. She was even killed by a mage who discovered her supernatural origin. Regardless of whom the real Jack the Ripper was, she was still shrouded in rumors and speculation. Society at large never learned the truth, instead living in fear of countless possibilities for the mysterious killer. Thus, what Flat summons isn't the true Jack the Ripper, but rather an ambiguous fusion of those rumors. This Jack is a shape-shifting entity without a defined form. It can be anyone, from a police officer to a prostitute. Considering the motives behind Jack's murders were also speculative, this combined Jack isn't even necessarily evil, allowing Flat to take a liking to it. False Jack's main goal is to discover its purpose and sense of identity. While Flat appears to be defenseless, sitting peacefully in the sun rather than fighting, he's way more capable than meets the eye. Without much effort, he can easily throw other mages off his trail. He can even hack into other mages' familiars. Fittingly, this unconventional master teams up with an unconventional servant. The same can be said for our next master, who is not a human, but rather a wolf chimera familiar. One of the mages hoping to enter the Grail War began creating a number of these familiars, which he would then use as catalysts to summon not just an ordinary servant, but also a divine one. Perhaps using a wolf was meant to summon the dog-like Anubis or some other Egyptian god. Either way, things go south for this mage when, instead of himself, one of his wolves is chosen as a master. Enraged, the mage mercilessly beat and tormented his own creation, aiming to steal back the command spells. Crying out in pain, the wolf howls, hoping to survive, which in turn summons the false lancer Enkidu. Overall, Enkidu is less of a god and more of a creation of the gods meant to do their bidding. When Gilgamesh, who was supposed to bridge the gap between man and god, became a tyrannical leader, the Mesopotamian gods created Enkidu in order to bind Gilgamesh to their will. Enkidu's a genderless, living noble phantasm, also called the Chains of Heaven. In legend, they took on a humanoid form after sleeping with a sacred prostitute, and after an epic battle with Gilgamesh outside Uruk's temple, the two became friends and trusted allies. This eventually urged the gods to punish Gilgamesh by killing Enkidu. It makes sense that the wolf would summon such a servant. Both of them were created as tools to do someone else's bidding. In tune with nature, Enkidu can understand the wolf's feelings and saves the cute pupper, choosing to spare its creator according to the wolf's lack of animosity. Of course, as you see in the anime, that mercy is for naught when Fallius Organization just kills the guy anyway. As soon as Enkidu and Gilgamesh realize they've both been summoned to the same era, they seek to celebrate by resuming their grand battle from legend. It's cool getting to see the real Enkidu in action, as before in the Babylonia anime, it was technically Tiamat's pawn, Kingu, using Enkidu's body. This means that, in addition to the Chains of Heaven, they can use the noble phantasm Age of Babylon. By expending their clay body as a resource, Enkidu creates enough flying weapons to match Gilgamesh's Gate of Babylon. This includes a version of Enuma Elish that can cancel out Ea. Their feud in the desert leaves behind a huge crater, and they don't even finish before getting interrupted by the false rider. I enjoy their conversation before battle, specifically when Enkidu points out that Gilgamesh has been summoned as a tyrant, even though he did wisen up later in life. To this, Gilgamesh even notes his childhood self would have despised what he became. Oh, how different things would be if we got Castor Gilgamesh instead. As for the false rider, who and what is it? Yet again, this results from an unconventional master and servant. The master is a little girl named Tsubaki Kuruoka, who was born to her selfish, greedy parents. They never cared about her well-being as a person, only birthing her as a means of improving their mage's legacy. To that end, they used techniques they'd gleaned from Zoken Mato to modify her body with bacteria. While this did make Tsubaki a fruitful mage, a mistake in their experiment put her in a coma. Without consciousness, Tsubaki's parents only kept her alive, thinking they could one day use her to give birth to a new heir. Both parents worked for the US government to research the False Grail Wars, and while they planned on participating in the war themselves, their chance was taken from them when Tsubaki gained command spells instead. Even while in a coma, Tsubaki lived in her own dream world, a place where she could escape her parents' cruelty. From inside this world, she summoned the false rider, named Pale Rider, a shadowy presence that watches over her. This guy, named after one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse from the Book of Revelation, most notably the Black Death that killed 50 million people. This should be terrifying, but Tsubaki doesn't fear it. After all, it has no will of its own, only acting on instinct, which includes trying to ease Tsubaki's turmoil. It has the power to overwrite her parents' personalities, forcing them to act like proper parents, and it even rushes out to the desert simply because the noise caused by Gilgamesh and Enkidu's fight scared her. The last of the false masters the anime introduces us to is Orlando Reeve, the chief of police in Snowfield. He's in cahoots with the Fallius Organization, participating in the war with a strong sense of justice. This alliance forces him to reluctantly tolerate Francesca and her sadistic whims. He's even at odds with his own servant, to the point where the two of them choose to speak over the phone rather than in person. This servant is the false caster, Alexandre Dumas. He became a famous author after reading a butchered adaptation of Shakespeare's Hamlet. He knew Hans Christian Andersen from childhood, and later in life, he collected ancient artifacts for a museum he established. This manifested in his legend as not a hero himself, but rather one who creates other heroes. More specifically, he can create other noble phantasms. Still, this doesn't stop him from inflating his own achievements, claiming to have slept with famous women like Cleopatra and Yang Guifei. He refers to Orlando as his bro, and helps out in exchange for wealth and women. Despite having some creepy dental work and a terrible personality, Dumas has the gall to pick out hot chicks he sees on TV for Orlando to hook him up with. You'd think with such tall orders, he'd prove himself useful, but I'll leave that up to you to decide. Rather than fighting on the front lines, Dumas provides Orlando's mage police officers their own noble phantasms, allowing them to form an elite unit called the Clan Calatin, named after the army that fought against Cuchulainn in the Ulster cycle. While these guys aren't servants, hopefully their numbers and noble phantasms can equate. So that's the lowdown on all 6 false masters and servants. What we're shown in the anime special is treated as day 0 of a war that's expected to last 7 days. Depending on how you read that, it could technically be 8 days. Not sure how you can even predict that sort of thing, though. That said, my goal isn't to spoil the war itself, but rather to give you the foundation going into day 1. Before we wrap things up, the anime teases us after the credits with some more important details I want to touch on. This is probably the most active we've ever seen Zelwretch. He's Keisher Zelwretch Schweinorg, quite possibly the strongest mage in the world. Technically, he's a magician, having acquired the second true magic, Kaleidoscope. It's the power to interact with parallel worlds, and here we see him literally sitting in a space between those worlds. From this place, he's able to observe different timelines, and by doing so, he's essentially choosing which worlds are considered real. I'm not sure what the full implications of this are, especially with concepts like proper human history and the Lost Belts. I'd love to hear your theories on this. Anyway, Zelwretch hardly ever interferes with these Grail Wars. Hell, we saw him in Heaven's Feel helping to build the Greater Grail. In this case, however, he's worried because one of the masters, Jester the Dead Apostle, wants the Grail in order to awaken the Spider, which is another way of referring to Oort. Once thought of as type Mercury, Oort is actually the ultimate one of the Oort cloud, a cloud of frozen particles that surround the sun and encompass the entire solar system. This makes Oort more or less the strongest entity in our solar system, strong enough that not even the mystic eyes of death perception can kill it. Long before the death of Christ, Oort made its way to South America and has been mostly dormant ever since. Zelwretch was able to defeat Type Moon, becoming a Dead Apostle ancestor in the process, so it's a big deal for Oort to worry him so much. he consults with another dead apostle, callback Alcatraz, who advises him to observe one specific timeline, believing it has a master and servant who will prevent the war from getting out of hand. That master happens to be a young girl named Ayaka Sajo. This name should sound familiar if you know anything about Fate Prototype. In that work, Ayaka was supposed to be the original protagonist, before Fate Stay Night went with Shiro Emiya. In Prototype, she was a teenage magus who summoned the male King Arthur. Perhaps the most confusing part of all of Strange Fake is that this particular Ayaka is a completely different person with the exact same name and a different hair color. This officially surpasses all the different Shikis, Ryogi, Nanaya, and Tono for the story's biggest mindfuck. Rather than having the backstory from Prototype, this Ayaka was actually introduced during Fate Hollow Ataraxia. In the very first scene of that visual novel, Shiro and his friends were staying up late at the Ryudo Temple, telling ghost stories. One of those stories described a girl named Person A, who used to live at the Semina Apartments in Fuyuki. She became traumatized after hearing about a family suicide in an adjacent unit, and was haunted by the family's daughter, a ghost called Little Red Riding Hood. While Ayako Mitsuzuri likely embellished her version of the story, Person A refers to Ayaka, who moved out of the complex and is still haunted by visions of the little girl standing in the elevator. I find it funny that the fan translation of Hollow Ataraxia assumes Person A is a man, though it's not like anyone could have predicted that, years later, Strange Fake's author would revive the obscure ghost story as actual character development. Ultimately, Ayaka wound up learning about the Holy Grail War and became the master of True Saber, aka Richard the Lionheart. Since these two are just barely featured at the end of this episode, though, I won't go into the specifics of how they met. Gotta save something for the actual show. For now, just know that Strange Fake literally has two girls named Ayaka Sajo, one with brown hair at the clock tower, and another with blonde hair who summons Saber. Why? Well, that's not something I have a decent answer for. Was it ever even stated? Be sure to tell me if you happen to know. Technically, you could go check out the manga right now, but if you're anime only, Whispers of Dawn is all you're gonna get for a while. I myself am excited to see what the full series has in store. Hopefully, my video has given you guys a lot of insight into the characters and circumstances behind this obscure Grail War. Which master and servant are you most looking forward to? Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments below.
Thanks for watching!
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to Otaku Daikun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
celebrate your fandom!
I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters. Video Gamer 75, Dante Pendragon, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, The Nonchalant Ostrich, Otaku Mom, Jens Bauman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Lord Omagoden, Freebrick, Olympian Doll, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Link Pendrago, Observer Bellis, King Kobo, James Hewitt, Uncanny EXP, Andre Foster, Jared Kraus, Sogai CH, Caitlin P, Vladimir Rovna, Jonathan Padua, The Taz 96, Maxwell's Demon, Kengo X 77, Alistair Bernadotte, SF Giants Fan Mike, and Akakaze Yume. Thank you all so much.